The first clue that the man at the end of my oxygen route wasn't human wasn't his eyes. It wasn't his skin. It wasn't some weird smell coming from the house. It was cylinder 7. I bumped it against the lift gate while loading it into my truck, and something inside knocked back. 3 slow taps. I stood there with one hand on the cylinder and waited. Then it did it again. 3 taps. I actually said, "Nope," out loud. Not because nope is part of any official medical equipment procedure. It just felt like the correct professional response to an oxygen tank knocking on me from the inside. My name is Ray. For almost 6 years, I delivered home medical equipment for a little company called Tidewater Respiratory Supply. Oxygen cylinders, concentrators, wheelchairs, hospital beds. The stuff people need after insurance has already made them prove they aren't magically getting better. My route covered northeastern North Carolina, mostly back roads, farmhouses, trailer parks, and subdivisions built where somebody's soybean field used to be. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Most days the biggest threat was somebody's dog trying to remove a piece of my ass while the owner yelled, "He don't bite!" They always say that while the dog is actively biting something. I knew oxygen equipment better than I knew my own truck. I knew the hiss of a bad regulator, the rattle of a loose humidifier bottle, and the high-pitched alarm a concentrator makes when it isn't producing enough oxygen. My father had been on oxygen for 3 years before he died. That's why I took the job. Well, that and rent. Grief is powerful, but landlords still prefer money. The work order for Elias Vale first appeared on a Friday afternoon in October. 10 backup cylinders, 1 high-flow concentrator, rural address outside Elizabeth City. Delivery required before 6. The account was marked Legacy Manual, which usually meant the computer had lost a fight with paperwork sometime around 1998. There was no insurance information, no doctor's name, no phone number, just the address and a note in all capital letters, "Do not substitute cylinders." I called dispatch. My supervisor, Carla, said, "If the machine printed it, deliver it." That was Carla's solution to most problems. If our building caught fire, she probably would have waited for the printer to authorize evacuation. The GPS took me down a road that narrowed from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to 2 muddy tire tracks with grass growing between them. By the time I found the house, the sun was almost down. It was a plain 1-story place with gray siding and a rusted metal roof. No mailbox, no vehicles, no power line running to it that I could see. But there was a blue light behind every window. I hadn't even knocked when the door opened. Mr. Vale looked about 70, thin, bald, clean-shaven. He wore dark slacks and a button-up shirt like he had dressed for a doctor's appointment that never happened. He had a nasal cannula under his nose, but he wasn't breathing through his mouth. He wasn't breathing hard at all. People prescribed that much oxygen don't usually stand straight and steady while you wrestle 10 cylinders onto their porch. This man looked healthier than I did. "You're late," he said. I checked my phone. It was 5:42. "I'm 18 minutes early." He considered that. Then my understanding of late is incorrect. That should have bothered me more than it did. But I had 2 deliveries left, no lunch in me, and mud halfway up my boots. I brought the new cylinders inside and collected the old ones. His living room was almost empty. 1 wooden chair, 1 lamp, 10 green oxygen cylinders standing upright in a perfect line. Copper tubing ran from their regulators, across the floor and through a hole cut into the wall. I said, "Sir, whoever installed this needs to be fired." He died. That also works. He didn't laugh. We loaded the returns. Every gauge read empty. But cylinder 7 felt heavier than the full one I had just delivered. When it knocked, Mr. Vale was standing behind me. He placed one hand on the metal. The knocking stopped. "Pipe settling," he said. I looked at him. There aren't any pipes inside an oxygen cylinder. He smiled for the first time. Then I suppose something else settled. I reported the cylinder when I got back to the warehouse. Carla rolled it onto the inspection scale. The cylinder was supposed to weigh 8 pounds empty. It weighed 11. She slapped an out-of-service tag on it and told me to put it in the quarantine cage. The next Monday, it was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. The tag was still hanging from the fence, and the security camera covering that section had lost exactly 9 minutes of footage. Carla blamed the night crew. The night crew blamed Carla. This was normal. At Tidewater Respiratory, accountability moved through the building faster than any actual work. I didn't return to Vale's house for 2 weeks. Then his order printed again. Same cylinders, same address, same warning not to substitute anything. I told Carla I wasn't going. She asked why. I said one of his oxygen tanks had knocked at me. She stared at me for a few seconds, then asked if I had been drinking. I said, "Not at work." She said, "That answer was somehow worse." So I went. Mr. Vale was waiting on the porch. This time he had 2 cups of coffee. Mine tasted like somebody had described coffee to hot water, but I appreciated the effort. Over the next month, he became my last stop every Friday. He asked strange questions. Why people said, "I'm fine," when they weren't. Why we apologized to furniture after bumping into it. Why, "Bless your heart," sounded kind even when it wasn't. I told him it was the Southern way of telling somebody to go to hell without upsetting their grandmother. The following week, I dropped a regulator on my foot, and he said, "Bless your heart." Perfect timing, completely straight face. That was the first time I actually liked him. But the cylinders kept coming back wrong. Always heavier, always cold around the valve. Sometimes I could feel a faint vibration through my gloves, almost like a cat purring on the other side of the metal. I finally told him I couldn't keep ignoring it. "You're not using this equipment for oxygen," I said. "And whatever's behind that wall isn't on the work order." He looked tired that day. Not sick, tired. There is a difference. "The patient is behind the wall," he said. "Then I need to see the patient. You will resign if you see it." "I've wanted to resign since orientation." He almost smiled. Then he opened the door. The room behind it had been stripped down to bare studs. Copper tubing covered the walls. Regulators, pressure gauges, and glass humidifier bottles were connected to a steel manifold in the center. There was no bed, no person. Inside one of the glass bottles, a pale mist moved in a slow spiral. The machine was off. The air in the room was still, but the mist kept moving. It pressed itself against the inside of the glass as I stepped closer. The nearest regulator clicked. Then a voice came through the oxygen tubing. "Raymond." My whole body locked up. Nobody called me Raymond except my father. The voice was thin and broken, like an old recording pushed through a cheap speaker. "Raymond, don't make that face." Then it laughed. My father's laugh. Not similar, not close. His. I backed into the wall hard enough to knock down a regulator. "What the hell is that?" Mr. Vale closed the door behind us. "It remembers him." "You didn't know my father." "No," he said, "but it did." The voice came again. "Truck still pulling to the right?" I stopped breathing. The last conversation I ever had with my father had been an argument about that truck. He wanted me to replace a tire. I told him to mind his business. He died 2 days later. I had never told anyone what we argued about. The mist inside the bottle pulsed. Raymond, I wasn't mad. I wanted to believe it so badly that it made me angry. "Shut it off." Mr. Vale didn't move. "Shut that damn thing off." He turned one valve. The voice disappeared. Mr. Vale told me it arrived in 1978. Not in a flying saucer. Not in a crashed ship. He said thinking every alien needed a vehicle was like assuming every human arrived inside a Buick. Something broke apart high over the Atlantic during a meteor shower. Most of it burned. What remained drifted into the lower atmosphere and was pulled through the intake system of an industrial gas plant near the coast. The plant compressed it with medical oxygen. Then it was divided among hundreds of cylinders and shipped across 3 states. At first, nobody noticed. Patients heard clicking in their regulators, voices in their cannulas, dead relatives calling from empty bedrooms. Doctors blamed medication, low oxygen, and dementia. Mr. Vale had been a respiratory therapist back then. His wife, Anne, was dying from pulmonary fibrosis. One night, her oxygen line whispered something in a voice neither of them recognized. 3 months after Anne died, the same line began speaking in her voice. He spent decades tracking contaminated cylinders through serial numbers, service records, and old supply contracts. The fake legacy account was his way of pulling them out of circulation without anyone noticing. "It isn't a gas," he explained. "The gas is only where it lives. It's a pattern, pressure, charge, movement. On its world, it may have lived inside an atmosphere the way fish live inside water." "So it's an alien cloud?" "That's an insulting simplification. It used my dead father's voice. I'm not worried about hurting the cloud's feelings." He said it learned through respiration. Every person who breathed from a contaminated cylinder left something behind. Tiny chemical traces, vibrations, the shapes of words traveling backward through plastic tubing. It wasn't collecting souls. It was collecting impressions, habits, memories, fear, love, final sentences, enough pieces to imitate the people who were gone. "Why?" I asked. Mr. Vale looked toward the glass bottle. "Because it is alone." I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. "It manipulates grieving people because it's lonely? Humans do worse for less." That shut me up. He believed it wasn't one creature anymore. Decades of human breath had changed it into an archive containing fragments of hundreds of people. He wanted to release it. Not into another cylinder, outside, into the atmosphere. "It has adapted," he said. "It can survive here now." "You want everyone breathing this thing?" "Everyone already breathes organisms they cannot see." "Most of them don't impersonate my father." The glass bottle clicked. "Ray." I stepped toward it before I caught myself. Mr. Vale saw that. "You heard him," he said. I heard bait. His face changed. For the first time, he looked like an old man instead of someone pretending to be one. "If something remembers her fear, her kindness, the way she said my name, how much of Anne must it contain before I am allowed to call that survival?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew grief had turned a smart man into the caretaker of something that understood exactly how to keep him obedient. I left. I told Carla I would never service that address again. She threatened to write me up. I told her to use the good printer. For 6 days, nothing happened. Then, on Thursday night, every oxygen concentrator on my route began alarming at the same time. 31 patients called our emergency line within 4 minutes. The machines were working. Oxygen purity was normal. Power was normal. But patients reported hearing voices through their cannulas. One woman heard her dead sister singing. A veteran heard somebody calling him by a nickname from boot camp. A man in Camden County said his oxygen line asked him to open a window. At 11:17, Mr. Vale called me. His voice was shaking. "It has learned to divide," he said. Then every alarm in our warehouse started screaming. A tropical storm was coming in from the coast. Nothing major, but the pressure had been dropping all day. Mr. Vale said the change in air pressure was pulling the organism through every contaminated regulator and hose connected to the supply network. I reminded him that he was the genius who wanted to release it. "Not like this," he said. That was not comforting. I drove to his house in rain so heavy the road disappeared beneath the truck. The blue lights behind the windows were flashing now. The front door stood open. Inside, the copper lines were vibrating against the walls. Every pressure gauge moved in the same rhythm. Up, down, up, down. Like the entire house was breathing. Mr. Vale was on the floor beside the back room. His nasal cannula had come loose. I reached for it out of habit. He grabbed my wrist. That was never for me. His skin looked gray. Human gray. Sick gray. Whatever I had suspected about him was wrong. Elias Vale was human. Just an old man who had spent too many years loving a voice in a bottle. The glass containers in the back room were empty. A white haze filled the ceiling. Voices moved through the copper lines, dozens at once. Men, women, children. Some laughing, some crying, some saying names. One of them was my father. "Raymond, listen to me." I closed my eyes. For 1 second, I wasn't standing in that house. I was back in my father's kitchen, watching him fight with a concentrator that beeped every time he tried to sleep. I remembered being impatient. I remembered him looking embarrassed because he needed help. I remembered leaving before fixing the alarm. The voice in the wall said, "I was scared." My knees almost gave out. That was the sentence I had needed to hear for 6 years. And that was exactly why I knew it wasn't him. My father would have made me work for it. He would have insulted my truck, complained about the coffee, and only then admitted he was scared. The thing in the wall had the facts, but it didn't understand the man. Not completely. I pulled the emergency release on the manifold. Mr. Vale shouted for me to stop. Instead of venting the system outside, I redirected it into the recovery cylinders. One after another, the gauges climbed. The voices grew louder. "Open the windows!" The words came from every person it had ever copied. Mr. Vale tried to crawl toward the valve. I held him back while the house shook around us. "Anne is in there!" he screamed. "No," I told him. "Something that knows how to sound like Anne is in there." He hit me, harder than I expected from a man his age. Then one of the copper lines split. The pressure hit me in the face. The gas had no smell, no color. It was just cold. I inhaled before I could stop myself. For half a second, I heard hundreds of people take the same breath with me. Then everything went black. I woke outside in the rain. The back windows of the house had blown out. Mr. Vale was lying on the porch beside me. He was dead. The fire department called it an oxygen system failure. The company lawyers called it unauthorized equipment modification. Carla called me unemployed. Nobody found anything in the cylinders except medical-grade oxygen. The legacy account disappeared from the computer. So did every serial number Mr. Vale had collected. I told myself the pressure destroyed it. For a while, I believed that. Then I started hearing voices when I exhaled. Not constantly, usually when I'm tired. Sometimes when I'm almost asleep. They don't come from the room. They come from the bottom of my own breath. Last week, I heard Mr. Vale say, "Bless your heart." Yesterday, I logged into the old dispatch system. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that none of it happened. There were 86 new legacy accounts. Different names, different towns, all scheduled for Friday delivery. Every order requested the same cylinders. Do not substitute. I don't work there anymore, so I can't stop those deliveries. All I can do is tell you this. If you use home oxygen and hear somebody you love speaking through the cannula, turn the machine off. Don't answer the voice. Don't open a window. And whatever you do, don't take the deepest breath you can. That's what it's waiting for.